you want. Cayenne will.
So,
So we can't really call to order.
Sorry, Summer said something that I missed.
Oh, sorry, I just said that you're recording.
Okay, great. Thanks, Summer. So we do not have a quorum, so we can't officially call to order, but we are still going to have a meeting. In attendance, we have planning commissioners, Ruben, Kaya, and John. We are missing Luke, Jesso, whoever is replacing Marianne, and then Becky. It is now 6:06 p.m. on Thursday, April 8th. First item is citizens to be heard, but it sounds like we are having some issues with that.
And Summer, do we have anybody who's?
I haven't seen any citizen comments.
Okay, I'm not surprised.
Okay, and then tonight we have a discussion item 3.1, a work session on the Walnut Lane preliminary site plan located at 250 and 280 West Walnut Lane, which is what.
Hey, I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Courtyard.
Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. So before I start this, I just want to let you know that on the 22nd, which is the next Planning Commission meeting, 2 weeks from tonight, we are having public hearings on Lions Back pad preliminary site plan approval, the Lions Back final MPD approval, and first phase plan. And we have a rezone request on off of Cane Creek Drive for a rezone from, what is it, to and from?
From RA1 agricultural residential to R3 multi-household. Right.
And they want to do kind of some smaller affordable by design units, but not by deed restriction. So that's next 2 weeks. So we need to figure out all this technical stuff for sure and make sure that we get a quorum, because that's going to be an important meeting. And we're likely to have a fair amount of input from the public. So, all right, let's get started with this one. So we've been talking about this for quite a while now, a year and a half, 2 years. And I know that Caitlin gave you a presentation several months ago about Walnut Lane and kind of where we were in the process. And we are now farther along in the process. And they are at the point where I think the Planning Commission is ready to review the preliminary site plan review. And what I'm going to go through these slides, and it's a lot of text, and I know it breaks all the rules of PowerPoint, but since you haven't been through the pad process before, and neither have I figured I just kind of do more rather than less, and I'll skip over a few of them pretty quickly. So this is noticed for a public hearing for your next meeting. Maybe if I can make it go.
More technical difficulty.
Yeah, it must be there. Okay. Okay, here we go. So Walnut Lane is located at 250 and 280 West Walnut Lane. I hope that you've all driven by there. If you haven't, please do. Looks a whole lot better than it used to. It's owned by the city. The applicant, Caitlin, is serving as the project manager from the city, and she's the special project manager emphasizing housing. And then tonight we also have Courtney Kaiser, who is part of the project team, and we'll be talking about some of the details on at least the phase one. So the total parcel size is 2.91 acres. It's zoned R4, manufactured housing residential zone. When we purchased the property, it was a split zone, R2 and R4. And if you'll recall, the Planning Commission recommended and the City Council approved a rezone so that the entire parcel is now R4. What's proposed is 80 rental units as a PAD, or planned affordable development. So this is the intent of the PAD. This is their intent that the applicant has presented. So applying for a PAD to redevelop the site into an 80-unit multifamily development, including apartments and duplexes. Collectively, the units will total approximately 37,567 square feet, or 29% of the site. 43% of the site will be dedicated for parking and vehicular circulation, and 28% will be open space. The current plan includes 132 parking spaces and will be accessed from two driveways located on Walnut Lane. And there's one pedestrian path from 200 North that is in place and will continue to be. So the intent again is to be built in 3 phases to ensure that the current tenants are not displaced during redevelopment. The first phase will take place in the southeast corner of the site and includes 4 stacked 2-bedroom duplex units. I'll show you that in a minute. The second phase will be in the southwest corner and will include 1 24-unit apartment building with 1 and 2-bedroom units. Phases 1 and 2 will all be deed restricted units, so they'll all be affordable. And all the current residents will be relocated into the first 2 phases of the project. Phase 3 will include 38 units, including 2 apartment buildings and 9 stacked duplex buildings, similar to the ones that are going to be in phase 1, probably. 66 of the 80 units, which is 82.5%, will be deed restricted. The PAD requires at least 70% of them to be deed restricted, and the remaining 14 will be market rate. All units will be long-term rentals, and there's no opportunity for nightly rentals. It's anticipated this time that the city would continue to own and manage this property, and that these would be rentals. So this is the parcel. This is Walnut Lane. Here's Williams Way with the Hoodoo Hotel here. And then you turn on Walnut Lane. This is Williams Way, Walnut Lane. And it's right, this is the property. It's actually 2 pieces of property with one in the middle. This is a privately owned dwelling. And at this point, she was not interested in selling off her property to us, so it will remain in place until such time as she decides what she wants to do with that property. So it's surrounded by R2 and R4 and a little bit of C2 zone with a little gap. Right next door, there is also a trailer park. We've been talking to him, the owner of this, on and off about redeveloping that as well, but we don't have any kind of a formal application. So this is the overall site plan, and certainly Caitlin and Courtney are going to give you more information on this, but this is what the application included. So the first phase would be these 4 units, and those 4 are on the east side of the property and would be basically duplex units. So 1 story below and 1 story above. So they're stacked units. The bottom units, and at least 3 of them, will be handicap accessible, and we're trying to make as many of them handicap accessible as possible. So this is the first phase. The second phase would be an apartment building over here. There's community open space provided, and there, when I get into the history, there is a landscape architect that's working on this who's really seems great and is providing that information. Parking necessarily takes up a bunch of the site. And then there's another sort of common space amenity back here. There could be room in these community spaces for community gardens, gathering spaces, and in these spaces, and then back here. So, and then the third phase is basically the rest of it, an apartment building, and then it looks like 5, 6, 7, 8, 4 more of the stacked units, and then some additional sort of twin home configuration is what's proposed for the preliminary site plan. So this property was purchased by the city. I see conflicting information, but somewhere around 2018. It was a trailer park with 37 units and was in a state of disrepair. 10 of the units have since been removed or vacated, so that there are now 27 occupied units. The city council has instructed the staff to develop a plan for 80 units. The intent is to provide a higher standard of living while maintaining affordability. And the direction from the city council, when we were given the charge to move forward with this, is to phase the development so that no tenants are displaced from the overall development during site development and construction, which is a little tricky, but we've been kind of moving things around and trying to accommodate that so that the first phase is basically in an area where there will no longer be any trailers. So that will be helpful for us to get going. What's happened since the purchase is cleanup and some ongoing maintenance. For a while, we had a property manager helping us out with that, but we fired them. And so the city actually has hired a person to help with the physical maintenance on site. And then the city is coordinating all the rent payments and everything else. There was a project team. There was an RFP or an RFQ, request for proposals or request for qualifications, that we sent out and opened up to bidders. And the team, we have a team that was selected. There were several bidders, and a team was selected and approved by the city council to move forward. And it's a great team, and I'll let Caitlin talk about the team a little bit more. But Courtney Kaiser is on it, who is an architect in Moab. We also have a local engineering firm. James Green from Set Engineering is the engineer. Having that local knowledge is really great, and we appreciate that about this team. And then there's some outside folks that are helping with landscaping. And then there's the building manufacturer is a group called IndieDwell, and they are kind of modular. I don't know what you call them, but anyway, they're sort of they're going to build the units on site. When we looked at a number of different companies that provided, we said, what if you just did more trailers? And so we looked at all those alternatives, and the council wanted to move forward with, instead of just replacing trailers to the current and make them to the current code. They advised us that they wanted to move forward with these IndieDwell units to kind of provide a new model. Oh yeah, so it's allowed to. The purpose of the pad, and I'm going to talk about the pad now, because we have not done one. And the purpose of this chapter is to allow planned affordable developments, or PADs, that provide incentives for the development of affordable housing. To qualify, PAD affordable housing units are subject to deed restrictions that preserve the affordability of the units for a period of not less than 50 years. The affordability controls provided in this chapter are voluntary, entered into by contract between the city and the applicant in exchange for the zoning concessions authorized herein. So this will have sort of a development agreement between the city council and the city and the development team for this project that we'll talk about the phasing. And so the planning commission's role is preliminary plat or preliminary site plans that have completed staff review will be forwarded to the Planning Commission with a staff recommendation. The Planning Commission shall hold a public hearing to review the application and receive public comment, and it may approve, deny, approve with conditions, or table the application pending receipt of additional information. The public hearing, as I mentioned, is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. And that's basically the role of the Planning Commission, is to look at the overall site plan. At preliminary plan review, the applicant shall demonstrate that the plat or plan meets all the submittal and performance criteria. Final construction drawings are not required at this time, but all submittals must demonstrate the feasibility of the final design in conformity with this chapter, applicable codes, and design standards. This project has gone through our has gone through our staff review process, which includes our development review team, which is made up of service providers and city staff, department heads that play a role with utilities and development. So those folks have all reviewed this and made comments, and so it will be before you at your next meeting. There are certain performance standards that are outlined in the PAD, and this is really what makes this zone unique. There's no minimum size requirement per se for the units, but the requirement is to make sure that these performance standards are met in order to make the project livable. So rather than say you have to have a 500 square foot unit, we say you have to have a unit, and the project itself has to address all these other things, including storage and parking and all those kinds of things. So there are performance standards that are laid out in the code, and at your next meeting, when this is up for action, we will go through all of those and how the preliminary site plan meets all of those criteria. Some of them, the city council would get into much more details, like the affordable housing plan, and some of them are more of a preliminary master plan review. So in the performance standards, we talk about affordability, including a mix of unit types and sizes, and it's strictly no overnight accommodations. It's for long-term rental. The PAD can also be done for sale product. So if somebody wants to develop a product that where they're for sale, that's the PAD can apply to that, and their affordable housing model will be a little bit different. Every unit must contain a kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, or sleeping area, living areas, storage space, and parking. The height of the structure's maximum in the R4 zone is 30 feet. The setbacks are what's required in the R4 zone. I don't know them off the top of my head. I was going to look them up. But it does require some buffering with adjacent properties. And we're looking at actually beefing up some landscaping along the west property line, which is adjacent to existing structures in the neighborhood. There have to be open space and common facilities. And these are just summaries. It's, I don't go into the specific criteria, but just to familiarize you with it. Stormwater has to be dealt with on site. And we've been working with the engineer and with Chuck Williams, our city engineer, to make sure that happens. Sidewalks and trails are proposed and are required. Parking is required, and I just included this because this is what the parking criteria actually says. And it's a little bit confusing, and there was a fair amount of debate on this at the city council level, but the language reads, at a rate of not less than 1 off-street space per 1 bedroom unit, and a maximum of 2 off-street parking spaces for each 2 bedroom or larger unit. Wherever parking area shall be located within the perimeter of the building envelope, hardscape, semi-permeable materials may be used for parking spaces. So that's the parking requirement, which again leaves some room for interpretation. All of the lighting has to be dark sky compliant, and we've been working with them and with Indy Dwell on that. Corey's been right on top of that as our dark sky guru for the city. If it's manufactured housing, obviously it needs to comply with the building code. Water, wastewater, there has to be municipal culinary and wastewater service. They can't do septic tanks or wells. The streets, we have to have adequate street access, public street access, and that access has to be hard surfaced. So the driveway that goes all the way around, that has two entrances and forms a U, eventually will be hard surfaced. Utilities, obviously, utilities are to be provided, and we've been in touch with all the service providers. There are open site specific elements, and this is kind of an open one. It says, has the city may require some additional site specific elements, but it really doesn't give us much guidance on what that means. There has to be covered lockable storage space to accommodate one bicycle per bedroom. And that is proposed on the site. It's proposed in a couple of locations, and not every single unit will have attached to it, a storage area, but there will be a common locked covered bike storage in a couple locations on the site. And then advisory document consistency. I don't really understand what this means either, but it requires compliance with advisory documents, and then talks about lot sales, which does not apply because all of the units are rental units. So we'll come back with you with more detailed information as to how the proposal meets all of those criteria. So the process today, once the application was filed, we had a pre-application meeting. The application was filed in February. We've been talking about this for a long time before that. So we've been working on this site plan and the development plans for quite a while. But finally, a actual site plan application and first phase application were filed in February. The first step was a pre-application meeting that occurred many times, actually before the application was submitted. The staff reviewed it, including the development review team, as I mentioned before. We sent it around to everybody and got comments back from all of our service providers and staff. And then Planning Commission review, your job is to review the preliminary site plan. Preliminary plan shall review the applicant shall demonstrate that the plat or plan meets all submittal and performance criteria. They meet the submittal criteria. I did a completeness evaluation. And then final construction drawings are not required, but all submittals must demonstrate the feasibility of the final design in conformity with this chapter, applicable codes and design standards. Oh, gosh. And then the final site plan review. So the Planning Commission's role is just for the overall site plan. And then when they submitted also an application for the phase one final site plan review for the first phase. And the Planning Commission doesn't even see that. It goes directly to the City Council. And the City Council is responsible for reviewing those documents and especially all related documents and agreements, including phasing improvements, land use restriction, and the conditions and restrictions, including the affordability plan. So that the final site plan review by the City Council is a lot more detailed as each phase moves forward. So that's all I had, and I am going to stop sharing and then turn it over to Caitlin and Courtney.
Thanks, Nora. That was a pretty good background. Courtney and I have a presentation. Courtney, do you want to lead through that?
Sure.
Or...
Just a sec to pull this up.
Okay. So Courtney has been our project lead for master plan development over this past year. So I'm going to let her walk through a lot of the work that we did to get to this point. I'll chime in and add a few points, but Courtney knows some of this better than I do. So.
Yes, Caitlin, please do chime in at any point. And thank you, Nora, for giving us all the background. We'll be able to coast through this pretty quickly as a result. So we just wanted to go back and remind everybody of the goals, meeting the codes and standards, particularly the pad, sustainability, meeting as much density as we could, making sure we have enough parking, and then really making the place special with the amenities that we provide. And then the phasing, of course, we'll talk about a bit. And then some results from some community participation that we posted. This is just a diagram that talks about where we and how we ended up with the duplexes and apartment schemes that we currently have. And it's mainly a product of the cost per unit. So obviously, the more units that you have in a single building, the lower the cost per unit. However, there's certainly benefits to single family and duplex typologies. So that's why we tried to create a mix of those things within the overall site plan. This is the same site plan that Nora showed you earlier. So along this side of the project are the duplexes. Along the top are some probably larger versions of that duplex, but we have, each of these would be 2 units, whether it's a twin home side by side or a duplex stacked one on top of the other. This apartment building would just be 2 stories, and the goal with that is to reduce the height of these buildings that are along the north edge, which is single family residential homes. This central apartment building and this apartment building on the south side, Walnut Lane, are both 3 stories. So we get a little more density at those 2 locations without encroaching too much on the neighbors. And then of course, these green spaces are those open space amenities we were discussing. This again talks a little bit more about the multiple stories and why we do need some of those apartment buildings to be 3 stories. That creates the opportunity for those amenity locations that are so important. As far as parking goes, that U-shape that we had with the double loading of the parking on each side is simply the most efficient way that we can provide the parking needed on site. And we are happy that we were able to provide the number of spaces that is required for the pad. You'll also see in some of the renderings that our hope is to use some solar panels to create some covered parking spaces, and that the solar panels can also serve to cover some of the walkways. You'll also see that we have designed in a bike barn, which we think is really important. That allows people to utilize their bikes as their primary source of transportation. Okay, and Caitlin, maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about this phasing while I have it up.
Sure, yeah, I can talk through this. So as Nora pointed out earlier, one of the council's biggest goals for this project was not to displace the current tenants living there. So it took us a while to figure out a phasing plan that would work well to meet that goal. So we have broken the project up into 3 phases. The first one is those 8 units that Nora talked about. And the plan is to move the tenants in those 7 trailers highlighted in blue. We'll move those into that first phase. And then moving into phase 2, we'll redevelop that site into the apartment building. So, you know, we're not going to have to displace any of those people now. And then with that 24 unit apartment building, we'll have enough units to move everyone else into that apartment building to be able to redevelop the back half. So any of the kind of coordinating that we have to do to prepare for site 1, any of the relocation of tenants, we're doing that in phase 1. We have both of those scenarios figured out. We have 1 tenant that's currently in a trailer that is in where we're going to do phase 1, and we're planning on relocating them in about a month. So yeah, so that's the phasing. And there was on phase 3, I think in the presentation I had a typo. So phase 3 will actually be 48 units. And we are kind of, the next slide will be about affordability, but we've figured out the phasing to make sure that we're front loading the more affordable units to make sure that those are affordable at the various income levels of our current tenants. And then phase 3 will be more of our middle income workforce housing market rate. And that's when we will put in all the community amenities and kind of finish this project out. So just touching a little bit more on affordability, we have a pretty good spread of units across all different ranges of AMI, starting with the extremely low income up to low income. That's about half of.
Can you talk about AMI a little?
Yes. So AMI is the area median income, which is set by HUD annually. It's set for a family of 4. And in the affordability calculations, it's explained a little bit further. That should be in your packet. But just as an example, the AMI in Grand County for 2020 was about 62,000 for a family of 4. So with the income restricted units, we are using the same calculations that HUD uses for like their light tech units, any of their income restricted units. So it's a pretty nationally followed calculation that's based on the tenants spending only 30% of their income on their monthly housing expenses. So partially because we know and we don't know that the current tenants are a wide spread of income restricted units, but also because we know that Walnut Lane is a great location for living and working in town. We wanted to make sure that we have a really good spread of lower income units for our workforce, but also we know that there's a really great need in the community for moderate income and for workforce housing. So we are front loading more of our lower income units to be dedicated to our current tenants, and then are also providing a little bit more than half of those units for moderate income and market rate to make sure that we're providing affordable units for everyone in our community across all incomes. So this is a breakdown by, per each income tier, the number of units that we're dedicating to that income bracket, and then just kind of collectively how many they are. So as Nora pointed out, we are deed restricting 66 of those units, which is over the PAD requirement of 70%. But we just think that deed restricting for moderate income is really important, so we wanted to prioritize that.
Also wanted to touch back on the idea of sustainability in this project. And of course, we've all heard about environmental sustainability, but there is also social and economic sustainability, which goes back to those affordability matrices that Caitlin just shared with us. As far as building goes, because we're mainly just looking at the site plan, a lot of these things won't come into play until the buildings start being designed by the future design team. But these things did come into our minds as we were placing buildings around the site. What is something that's a part of this phase 1 site plan and the site plan you're looking at today is how landscaping is incorporated into the project. Stormwater management was a really big piece of the puzzle. The little blue pond type thing you saw in the top left-hand corner of the site plan is the main stormwater management location. So that is where all the water will run to. And then there's a series of plants and low water use areas that will be scattered around the site that help dissipate the water as it heads towards that location. And we do also have in our phase 1 site plan a detailed site plan or a detailed landscaping plan that shows all of the plants that have been selected and how those will be watered and irrigated. I've highlighted or put in bold the elements that are captured by the site plan that we've currently got drawn. So passive solar and daylighting, just by the orientation of the buildings and their relationship to open space. We've shown bicycle storage facilities as well as individual unit storage facilities for the apartments. We are planning on having solar PV throughout the site, and of course that adapted landscape that we discussed. All the rest of these items are certainly still on the table for the future, but they would need to be incorporated to the specific building designs, particularly apartments that will be forthcoming. So as many of you may know, we did have a little community outreach event at the site, and Caitlin also put together an online survey. So there were 100 responses, and the general gist of the people that filled that out is they were Moab community residents, and then a couple of people that live on the site and a handful of neighbors. The things that we showed them as far as architecture goes were these forms to just try and get people's feel for what type of architecture they like, anything from modern to traditional. And same thing with materials. Were they feeling like they liked more traditional material palettes or something a little more modern? And the results in general were that transitional type architectural style and materials were kind of where people were leaning. We also gave them an option of different amenities to see how they might want to fill the open spaces. And these were all the options from shade shelters, picnic shelters, community grill, community garden. And the gist of it is they want it all, which I can't blame them. And thankfully, we have enough room on the site to make it happen. So that's something that will be forthcoming in those green spaces you saw on the site plan. And back to you, Caitlin, for the individual units.
Thanks, Courtney. Just one more comment about the community outreach. We did have, so the online survey received 100, I think it at the end was 101, but we did have a specific on-site event for Walnut Lane tenants and neighbors. And we probably we had 2 sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and we probably had 40 to 50 people, probably about 40 come between those 2 events. Most of them were tenants, and we got some really good feedback and had really great conversations. And it was just like a really nice event to have the neighbors and tenants and city staff interacting and doing a lot of Q&A and talking through some of those diagrams. So that was great. So we just wanted to bring you, this is not specifically related to the site plan that you're reviewing today, but just to give you a little bit of a preview of the floor plans and elevations that we're looking at for phase 1. These are, so this is the accessible version of the floor plan that is proposed by IndieDwell. They're about 672 square feet, 2 bed, 1 bath. And on the bottom floor, we're still hashing out. We should be getting a full document set from them tomorrow to really hash into some of the details and the sustainability features that Courtney was just talking about. But all of the bottom units are going to be ADA and or visitable for wheelchair. And we have a couple of current residents at Walnut Lane that need those, so we're really excited to be able to move them into these units so that they have a more livable space. So these are the floor plans. And then if you want to go to the next one, these are the elevations. They're going to have shed roofs that are, these are actually a little bit older. We've actually changed the orientation of the roof line so that they are southern facing. and I didn't catch that earlier. But they will be southern facing. These buildings will be built to net zero ready energy codes. So at some point later in the future, we'll be able to utilize these roofs for solar panels and make them totally net zero ready if that's how the council wants to proceed with these units. So we are, yeah, I mean, that's the long and the short of it. And then we just wanted to close out and kind of show you some more renderings of what this site would look like. So with the full site plan and then a few snapshots, you can see the PV panels that Courtney mentioned earlier around the perimeter of the site, which will offer you know, a shaded walking path, and will also provide shade to the cars. And so that's a goal for this project that's not concrete in the plans yet, but that's something that we'll be working on and prioritizing as we move forward. Some of these other snapshots show the community open spaces, views from some balconies, and a little bit of the bike storage. I think there's a better one of the bike storage on the next slide. Yeah, so yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. The buildings that are in these renderings are mostly to show scale. And we created these to show at the community event that we had a few months ago with residents, just to primarily show scale. And we'll be incorporating the comments that we received about architectural form and exterior sidings to change these buildings so that they look a little bit more like the feedback that we received. So any other comments you had on that, Courtney?
No, I think you nailed it. Yeah, we're excited to share these renderings with you all. So, and we can flip back to any parts of the presentation that you would like to discuss.
So maybe Kaya, I don't know if you want to unshare or if planning commissioners have specific comments on any of these images. We can go to that, or maybe just go to the site plan.
Yeah, I think going back to the site plan would be.
Okay, we all know what each other looks like. We don't really need that.
I mean, I can see both the site plan and everyone, so.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah. Oh, I had one other comment about this site plan that has changed a little bit from what you see here. So there are, I'm going to try and draw on this. So there are 6 parking spaces planned right here. That's a really bad circle. We have, we've changed around, just like modified slightly some of the parking. So those 6 parallel spaces are going away, and we've redistributed that parking elsewhere in the site. So yeah, so we've updated that easement with that adjacent property owner. And that will just be, that area and that easement will just be used for access, and we'll be putting a sidewalk there instead.
Hey, Caitlin and Courtney, thanks for the presentation. I have 2 questions for you on this. It looks like, and I'm presuming that this was designed in a way to allow for future expansion if the kind of in-holding landowner decides to sell in the future. That's one question. And the other, there was a slide talking about the sustainability efforts, the high cost, low reward, low cost, high reward. And the one talking about the solar panel implementation, obviously I'm a huge advocate of solar. But the question around that is, did you look at the cost benefit from like of the value that you get for carbon emission reduction? Or is this really just based upon like people choosing, oh, we want solar because solar looks cool and it looks sustainable. Like, did you kind of run that analysis of what the reduction in carbon emissions will be for that?
We have not, and I would love to sit down and talk to you, John, about that.
I'm happy to anytime. My only thought is, obviously, I'm on the generation side of the business for my day job, but oftentimes we look at it and, you know, we forget that energy efficiency is significant. You get a significantly higher reward for that than the generation side. It's a lot cheaper to do energy efficiency and reduction. So,
yeah, I would say, so our priority is definitely on energy efficiency and focusing on the buildings. I think the solar PV stuff, both on the rooftops and around the parking, would be a nice cherry on top, but that's not currently in any of our budgets at this point. I think that that's something that would come in at phase 3 or after phase 3. And just another thing briefly about the parking, I think that we still would want to consider covered parking, even if they aren't with solar panels. But I've talked to a few people about just because we're planning on putting in landscaping and replacing trees, and you know, some of the impacts to the solar grid for shade on that solar panel, and how we'd have to kind of break it up into different grids to make sure that we're not using that system efficiently. So there's a lot of questions that I still need to do some research on before we really dive into the solar. I think it's a wish list thing at this point, and we are focusing mostly on those low cost, high return, and some of the other items in the high cost, high return categories.
Yeah. Cool. I think you might be able to shift, like if you got rid of the solar PV or even future possibility of it, you might be able to shift that added cost to get more of the low cost, high return items. I don't know for sure, but I suspect that you would be able to. So it's just
Cool.
Otherwise it's great. It's cool.
Okay, so Kaya, I don't know how you want to run this, but do you just want to ask folks if they have questions, and then we can do comments?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, while we have all the folks here, I think regardless of us not having a quorum or not having other planning commissioners here tonight, you know, this will be available for them to watch and for members of the public. So I think any more information, things we can iron out ahead of time, you know, in advance of a public hearing that's forthcoming would be great. I, you know, personally, having been on the planning commission for a while, involved in Moab for longer, this is really exciting to see what it's going to look like. It's really cool. I think this was a great thing that the city did in preventing people from being displaced from their homes and sort of getting the ball rolling on real, actual higher density affordable development in town. So I'm just really excited to see what it's going to look like. And I think it's really great that we are designing and making this something that is not just a place to live, it's a place that I think people are going to want to live, which is really exciting. So thanks, Courtney and Caitlin. I know that's, you know, you've worked really hard to make that the case. So
and this it's been very complicated because of, I mean, their utilities, we don't even know where all the utilities are, you know, I mean, because this was developed such a long time ago. And so there's been a lot of site work done, and it's just taken a tremendous amount of work to get us to where we are. And I really want to thank Caitlin for managing all of that. She's done an amazing job, and the project team that we have is also really amazing. So we're fortunate.
Yeah. You know, John, do you have any more questions? Ruben, any questions that we can sort of float while we still have Caitlin and Courtney here to discuss things? Now would definitely be the time.
So you said something about parking and the parking on the side of the property owner that's in the middle. Those you've moved into the other places?
Yes. So the long of the short of it is there's quite a bit of space on that northern end behind those kind of twin home larger duplex buildings. And so we have shifted those up to be closer to that setback. Yeah. So we've shifted those up and have been able to reallocate and actually, I think, increase the parking from even I think this site plan is actually showing 130 spaces. And when we shifted those up, we were able to add those six spaces elsewhere and then add the other two that we were missing. So yeah, that easement, we needed to update either way, but we wanted to preserve that for access and not use it for parking. And especially because that kind of easement area is going to be a really great access to the apartment building and to that community space. So we wanted to make sure that that was sidewalk instead.
Awesome. I mean, I wish that I had more to ask and question, but I feel like you guys did a really good job with the presentation. And I mean, the renders look awesome. I mean, if you could just copy those right over.
Thanks. We'll see. It'll look different than the renderings, but it'll still look pretty cool.
Okay. Great. I will end the work session now. Thanks all. That was really, really informative, and I will make sure to really strongly encourage as much as possible the absent planning commissioners to watch this. It's going to be really critical, I think, to answering questions down the road.
So John, did you have any other questions or comments?
No, nothing else from me. Thanks.
Great. Excellent. Okay. And as you have questions and comments, email them to me and I will forward them to the appropriate people. That would be fine. All right. So we will talk about it more in 2 weeks.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I guess we're already on.
All right, our next discussion item is another work session on modifications to the Moab Municipal Code to allow seasonal outdoor dining and parklets in the city right of way.
Okay, I sent you some materials on this, and I will continue to look for ideas, but let me show you first our existing temporary outdoor dining application packet. Share screen. So a little bit of background. Last year, with the COVID restrictions and not being able to serve patrons inside, a couple of the city council really encouraged us to develop this temporary outdoor dining based upon COVID restrictions, which would allow them to have some in-person dining, but outdoors under certain conditions, including distancing and cleaning protocols and all those kinds of things. So we developed this packet that allows restaurants to expand into the public right-of-way adjacent to commercial establishments. Businesses are authorized to move operations outdoors into an adjacent public space. There's one that also went into a privately owned space, which is a parking lot, and the two that were put in place last year are both up again this year. They still fall under this temporary COVID restriction that will expire on June 30th. So what we need to do is develop land use standards which allow seasonal outdoor dining with or without COVID. There are many communities that have gotten into this. Some of them, all of them take a little bit different approach. But some of our main concerns, safe pedestrian pathways, fire lanes, ADA requirements. We ask that folks get together and talk to their neighbors about it, which the two that we actually had placed did. Here's some, also just some pictures. This one does actually does not conform. Well, it does have this railing. But we want to make sure that they are as safe as possible. So we have been using some of these orange barriers, at least on the oncoming traffic side, to try to provide some safety. And the recommended width of the sidewalk is 72 inches. Many of our sidewalks aren't that wide, but we want to try to maintain that sidewalk space so that people can walk up and down the sidewalk. The width cannot exceed the frontage of the business property that's behind it, except without written permission from that adjustment property owner. Temporary structures are allowed, but they have to be, shall not be permanently affixed. And this is so if we have an issue, like we have a big thunderstorm and we have a bunch of storm drainage, a bunch of runoff, and there's a bunch of junk that goes in the storm drainage. If necessary, we want to be able to get in there and clean out some of that stuff and do whatever repairs we might need to do. There's restrictions on trash and recycling. Cleaning common surfaces, some of this we will probably not include in the code requirements. Alcoholic beverage permission is really a separate process. The city's role is just to provide a local consent letter, and Joel does that, so the planning commission won't have any role in that. It won't be a planning process. And where this would apply is really the side streets, because Highway 191, as you all know, is a state highway, and they absolutely won't allow this in the public, in any dining in the public right of way. There are a couple buildings on Main Street that have put some tables along the sidewalk, and that's fine. But in terms of actually using city right of way, that is not possible along Main Street. So there are some Main Street businesses that have frontages on both Main Street and a side street. And in that case, there may be opportunity on those side streets to provide, to do this. But we haven't really gotten interest from those folks at this point in time. And right now, our code is basically silent on outdoor dining and seasonal outdoor dining. It used to be a conditional use, but when we got rid of conditional uses, we got rid of, it included outdoor dining. So now we really don't have anything. And what we have been doing for folks who wanted to do additional outdoor dining on site is that they have to continue to meet the parking requirements for the type of use. So if they're expanding their seating area, they need to accommodate for that in parking as well. They would not be required to provide additional parking if it's in the city right of way. And as I look through some of the examples, some communities only allow 2 spaces to be used. I think with Alex's, with 98 Center, we use 3 parking spaces, all just right in front of his building. Noise. We're going to talk a whole bunch about noise with the city council at their next meeting, but it would be governed by the noise ordinance. Use of outdoor dining area must set at 10, administrative fee. And then there's some more specific design criteria. And this was a compilation of input from the city engineer, fire district, the health department, the building official, the streets, the public works director, and the city engineer and planning. So this whole packet was really developed and approved by all of those folks. And then they also have to sign into a license agreement, and they have to have insurance coverage. And this is all on insurance, and this was written by our city attorney. And the one that we currently have, they were able to comply with this. There was some concern that they wouldn't be able to comply with those terms, but they were able to. So that's what we have right now, and we require a site plan. And so I'd like to keep, probably a lot of the things that we've already done will transfer nicely into a section in the code. I don't know exactly where we're going to put it, maybe supplementary regulations, and then reference set in each of the land use zones where we think it makes sense to allow these things. Let me just show. This is an older version of Salt Lake City's outdoor dining guidelines. I really like this packet. And some of the newer things that they've developed are more COVID related. But this was kind of a more general stab. And I like the layout of this, and it talks about steps for approval. This was all done before COVID. Talks about the design of barriers, height, planters, some really specific drawings, site distance triangle. Actually, this is really an interesting one. So right now, the one that's in place in front of 98 Center, right at the corner of Center and 2nd East, I think it is. Maybe it's 3rd, maybe it's 1st.
It's
East.
first.
Yeah.
Last year we just had, straight extension of the curb and gutter. And this year we've asked them to do sort of a diagonal cutoff so that pedestrians can be seen more easily. And they've agreed to do that. That would definitely be a requirement. Our public works folks also intend to paint like look both ways and some specific signage for pedestrians so that they need to be more aware of crossing the streets. This is, these are things that are going to be used during a time primarily when there's a lot of traffic and people have to go pretty slow. Center Street is a pretty low speed limit, so it works well on Center Street. And then they just have a bunch more examples with more detail on everything. So that I think is helpful. And then I liked these two from Reno. If I can pull them up. Where should Parklets go? Again, it's just sort of and this I don't believe was COVID. So it's just general, and it's not very long, but it's their kind of their packet. And it's general. This is just a PowerPoint presentation and their packet. So, and when we, at the staff level, we want to make this an administrative process if possible, rather than things having to come to the Planning Commission. It's not a conditional use, so we want to make it administrative. Right now, we are requiring sign-offs from the city engineer, fire, health, and the building official, and planning, and Levi, the public works director. So I suspect that kind of sign-off will continue. Some of the things, when we went to the city council with this, before we did the temporary outdoor dining due to COVID, we had a work session with the city council, and this is the staff report from that work session. And we talked about a number of things at that time. And most of this is just information that I just talked about. But there were a couple of things that I wanted staff direction, with the staff wanted direction from the city council on. And I wanted to know if they wanted to restrict hours or days of operation. At that time, we were looking at Thursday through Sunday each week. The city council said, go for it. Whenever they want to do it is fine with us. So we do not have any restrictions currently. And I don't know what your recommendation will be about that, but that will, will be passed on to them. Area where we would accept application. Initially, we were recommending in the sort of downtown core area. The city council gave us direction that they didn't necessarily want just that this could apply anywhere in town. We talked about notification with adjoining property owners and decided to go to kind of a kinder and gentler approach to that, where the applicant has to provide proof that he talked to his neighbors. And that actually worked well last year. So those are some of the things I wanted direction from the city council. At the time, they basically said, just go for it and be with very few restrictions. So what we'll be talking about at the next work session on this is more specific guidance from the Planning Commission on some of those things. And then we also could talk about things like, do we want to have a maximum number of outdoor dining like on city right of way per block or not? Do we want to limit the number overall or per street? Or, whether we wanted to put any kind of a limitation on there. Because during our busy seasons, the places that these parklets will go are parking. And so it will take away some parking, not a large amount. And I think it's worth, the costs outweigh the benefits in this, I think, in the eyes of the city council and in our eyes. And if you go around the West, but I think all over the country, you'll notice that these things are popping up everywhere, which is awesome. Some places like Park City, they require all applications to be turned in by a certain date every spring that talks about what each restaurant might want to do. Of course, they have Main Street, which is not a state highway. And they make the determination sort of in a bunch. It's like everybody applies and then the city goes through it and determines which ones meet the application requirements and the intent the best and grants those. For that, they actually are in Park City because it's very hilly. They are building decks and more permanent structures, but they review them. They ask for the applications and kind of review them all at once. Telluride has a similar program where at the beginning of each spring, they ask people and there's an application deadline, and then they look at it and try to figure out which ones make the most sense. And there are some limitations on the number on their Main Street, Colorado Avenue, and they have some other restrictions. So the questions will be, and next time I will also want to I'll show you a map kind of the downtown core and show where our restaurants currently are. It's not like we're going to have 100 of these because there just aren't that many opportunities. And I think the city council really feels like when there's an opportunity, if a restaurant owner wants to do it, that we should let them do it, basically. And we just the Planning Commission needs to recommend to the city council what those parameters might be, if any. There was also some talk of allowing non-restaurants to have outdoor space. I think that was really in relation to the COVID situation where people couldn't really, or were not comfortable coming in stores. I would not recommend that the Planning Commission and City Council look at that, but certainly if you want to, there are communities where the cities and towns allow extensive outdoor display of merchandise, and there are those that don't. And I think having outdoor dining is great. I think having a bunch of clothes racks out there in the right of way is maybe not necessarily in what we're looking for. And these things activate the street, and they slow the traffic. They make it kind of more pedestrian friendly. So I think, I think they're good things. We just need to decide exactly how we want to do it. So we'll be working through those things, and we'll probably have one more work session. And then I will draft the code. the goal is to recommend these to the city council, for the city council to adopt the code amendments by June 30th. So we will be moving forward this pretty expeditiously.
Hey, Nora, I have a question for you. Well, so a couple questions. The first one is, why does Telluride and some of the other communities do it like an annual application process? And I can't figure out what the purpose of that would be. Yeah.
I think it's because what they generally end up approving is sort of more, they're both on really slopey streets. And so they have to build these decks to make them, to make the use level. So the structures are more permanent. And I think that I know in Park City's case, they don't want to totally restrict traffic and parking on Main Street. So they allow them at intervals. And they don't, so they, I don't know if there's an actual number limitation, but certainly they have some locational standards. Because they don't want the whole street to be that way. We don't necessarily have that problem because our Main Street is state highway and we can't allow them anyway. So that's why they do it that way. I don't see a need necessarily to do it that way. But that's up.
Okay. Yeah. And who would want to do outdoor dining on our state highway anyway? It's kind of loud and noisy. So my other question, this is the business person coming out in me. Our right of way that the city owns is an incredible asset. Is it market for us to give it away for free? I recognize that it generates more revenue and everything else, but we're basically allowing restaurants to expand their square footage in a pretty big way for no cost.
I understand that. And we talked about that at the city council level, and they they love these things, man. They want to see them.
They're awesome. They're great. But also business is making a lot of money for free.
I totally understand. And we may end up talking about that. That's really a business decision that the council needs to make. So I think the council will certainly talk about that further. The hotspot money that we applied for with UDOT, one of the things we are asking UDOT to fund is middle of the street parking with one lane on each side. And so that would effectively get rid of all these, because there would only be one lane of traffic on each side. And then all the parking would be in the middle. There would be parking on one side and then in the middle or whatever.
Of our Main Street, one lane?
No, not Main Street. On our side streets. That was 100 North and to 100 South and Center Street is what we're looking at for our hotspot funding. We don't know if we're going to get it. But that would change what we would be allowing private businesses to do. And again, trade-offs.
Yeah, that was my only thought. I mean, I'm indifferent one way or the other. It's 50-50 for me, but it's like, well, it is free rent for restaurants. That's a pretty good deal.
Yep, it's an asset that the city has. I'm sure if Bill had his way, we would charge for it, but the city council seemed to want to make it as easy as possible for people.
Yeah. Okay.
Besides 98 Center, who else is using this?
Subaku, who is also
right next.
But they're not on public property. They're in a private parking lot, and they received permission from that parking lot, and they had to move around some ADA parking and some things in order to accommodate that patio out there. So those are the only two that applied, and they were both granted last year. And as I mentioned, Alex has both of those back up and running again, I believe. And he also has some suggestions for maybe some modifications we can make. So I'm going to chat with him about that too, about last year, what worked, what didn't work, those kinds of things.
Are there any other businesses that could use it? Like, I'm looking at a map and I can't picture any that could either use public right away because they have a parking, spot themselves, but I can't picture anywhere else.
Singa, the Thai place, could do it. I think there are enough, and that's what I want to do next time is actually get a map and identify where the restaurant spaces are. A lot of the buildings on the side streets could potentially be restaurants. It would be a change of use, but it's zoned for it. So we would be looking at this mostly in the C3 zone primarily. And as we change as we change the regulations for C3, when we start talking about overnight accommodations again, that transparency between the public and the private realm is something that we think is really important. So it may actually lend itself to that and some of the C2 and C3 properties, mostly on the west side, but also on the east. And as you drive through town, notice what you think might make sense for what businesses. There is, we had the chicken place wanting to put, and I think they have put tables in that little alley next to them. The problem with that alley is that it's actually an easement, and they have to they're really temporary because they have to take them down if somebody, if fire needs to get back there or anything else. So there's some further restriction on that just because of what that space is.
That's Dober.
Yeah, Dober.
And then another thing, as far as would we be looking at like permanent parklets? Because I think I was looking at Reno, and I think maybe on the 5th page of Reno, those are built up, right, to match the sidewalk.
Yeah, and at this point in time, we're not really looking at long, year-round parklets. I think that's when we get in more into public property and what we want to do with our public property. When I worked in Park City, we did what do we call them? Pocket parks, pocket plazas, because at the time alcohol could not be served in a park. So we called them pocket plazas. And what we did is we asked property owners who had vacant properties that were not yet built on, and asked them if they would allow the city to come in and do just kind of a minimum level of improvements while it was still vacant to make it a gathering space. And it worked great when Main Street was full of older buildings and the businesses were really hurting, which is when we did it. And the city ended up buying 2 of those parcels, and they are now permanent. And then the other ones were replaced by buildings. So that's certainly something that Moab can look at. It's all part of how we want to spend our money. Right now, we have an awful lot of just basic infrastructure needs. So that's going to be the emphasis for the next couple of years for sure. But hopefully maybe with the RAP tax, we can have more funding for kinds of arts installations and stuff like that could be more permanent.
Like giant stained glass sculptures.
Yeah, exactly. Giant stained glass sculptures. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Nope. Thanks.
Thank you all, and we'll be talking about it more. We may not talk about the next meeting. Holy crap, there's like 50 turkey vultures out there right now, circling. Uh-oh.
Better not do this code then.
Well,
you say, look alive.
Their migration season right now. They appear this time, which is very cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, there's just all kinds of them. Looks like they're having fun.
That's the same thing I said when I was coming into town and I had to wait 30 minutes with all the cars.
Having fun. Like they're having fun, or the turkey vultures are circling.
Yeah. So the highway stuff should be completed soon. UDOT is really working as fast as weather allows. I know it was a mess over the Jeep week, but it really is supposed to be better very soon. So hopefully they'll finish up soon. And we've been on them hard to try to get that stuff done. So
is all of the paving done? What are they left to do?
I'm not sure. I haven't been out there in a while for obvious reasons. But I think they still have a layer of asphalt. And I know they have a bunch of the connections from the businesses to the asphalt. So there's probably some curb and gutter that may need to also be done. And that's concrete. So, you know, and then the asphalt, they all have certain weather requirements. So they're trying to figure all that out. Fortunately, we've had a warm spring, so they've been able to do quite a bit. Okay, that's all I've got.
All right, we will end this non-quorum unofficial meeting of work session. I mean, well timed that we didn't have action items, but
Oh, one more thing. Our next meeting, which is the big public hearing meeting, will be via Zoom. And Summer will orchestrate that somehow. She's a wizard. And then probably we're going to open back up to live meetings in May. That's what the city council is thinking at this point in time. We wouldn't want to open up and require the planning commissioners to come in if you haven't been vaccinated or if you're uncomfortable with it. So, and I think the city council is in the same boat. So we may try to do some sort of a hybrid system. Again, if maybe members of the public also aren't comfortable in showing up inside quite yet. So we're gonna see how it goes. Tentatively, the plan is to meet in person live in May, but we'll see.
Well, what was the situation today? Why is that? Because Corey set it up on his account, or okay,
Yeah.
the permissions.
Yeah,
Who knows with Zoom?
and they
With
changed all
yeah, the authorizing of recording and streaming and all those things. Yeah, it changes every week.
Yeah, the Zoom platform is great, but they do little tweaks all the time. And it's like, oh, this changed. So it's hard to keep up with all of that. Okay.
Well, thank you for the meeting.
Thanks, everybody, for your time.
Bye.
Talk to you all soon. Enjoy this beautiful weather.